The HOA walked onto my property like they ruled the lake, until one forgotten document blew their whole kingdom apart. The morning they showed up for my dock, I thought it was just another HOA tantrum. But the second that violation notice hit my hand, I felt something shift, like the lake itself was waiting for me to fight back. I'm Evan, and what started as a threat over a few planks of cedar turned into a war that exposed who really owns the waterways in this county. Stick with me. This one gets wild. If stories of justice, land rights, and standing your ground hit home, drop a quick justice in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next showdown. The first light of Montana morning always comes quiet, like it's taking its hat off before stepping into the day. That dawn was no different. Thin fog clung low over McAllister Lake, drifting across the water in long silver ribbons. The surface lay smooth as polished glass, taking the first warmth of sunrise and turning it into gold. I stood barefoot on the cedar planks of my dock, planks I'd milled by hand, sanded slow, sealed with care. The wood still carried the faint scent of linseed oil and early summer sawdust. It was the smell of peace, of work done right, of the promise I'd made to my father before he passed. Keep the lake in the family. Keep it honest. The air tasted clean, cold enough to sting the lungs, and the stillness was so complete I could hear the soft ticking of my cooling coffee mug. That dock was my quiet place, my anchor when the world felt too loud, too fast. I took a slow sip, watching the mist settle around the far pine line like a blanket. Somewhere across the lake, a loon gave its long, lonely call, the old kind of sound that doesn't just echo, it settles deep in your ribs. That was the last moment of peace I had all day. The sharp clack of heels on wood, loud, fast, and completely out of place, cut through the morning like a misfired gunshot. The fog parted as a figure marched down my dock with the determination of someone who'd practiced this walk in the mirror. A woman in a tailored rose-colored blazer and too perfect hair. HOA President Denise Harland. A name folks in the neighborhood said low, the way you'd mention a snake you weren't sure was dead. She didn't greet me, didn't nod, didn't even take in the lake like a normal person. She walked straight up to me and slapped a crisp white paper against my chest, hard enough to splash my coffee. "Violation notice," she barked. "Structure unauthorized. You have 48 hours to remove this dock, or the HOA will pursue property seizure." I blinked, still half inside the quiet morning I'd been enjoying. "Ma'am? What?" "Don't play coy, Mr. McAllister." Her voice sliced through the calm. "This dock is non-compliant with Lakeshore community standards. It must be dismantled immediately." I stared at her, then at the notice. Big red letters stamped across the top, the kind meant to scare folks more than inform them. "I built this dock," I said, keeping my voice even. "Filed every permit, passed every county inspection." "That's irrelevant," she snapped, heels shifting on the planks like she wanted them to sound louder. "The HOA controls all lake structures. This is our shoreline, our view, our rules." A small gust of wind rippled across the water, carrying the cold edge of disbelief with it. I looked past her to the mountains rising soft blue in the distance, then back at the woman blocking the sunrise like a bad omen. "Since when," I asked slowly, "does the HOA own the water?" Her lips tightened. "Since we decided we need consistency around here. This," she flicked her fingers toward the dock as if it were trash on a sidewalk, "is an eyesore, non-standard, unapproved, and it goes." The mist thickened behind her, as if the lake itself wanted to hide from this nonsense. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, the violation notice crinkling in my hand, feeling the morning slip away piece by piece. 48 hours, she repeated, "or we take action." With that, she pivoted on those sharp heels and walked back toward shore, her steps echoing across the water until they faded into the trees. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The dock beneath my feet creaked softly, an old, familiar sound that never once threatened me. The notice shook slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from a slow-growing anger simmering under my ribs. I looked down at the lake, at the dock, at the quiet morning she'd just shattered. Why was she acting like she owned the water? The wind didn't answer, but the lake, old and patient as ever, seemed to whisper back, "Find out." By mid-morning, the fog had lifted and the sun hung bright over the water, warming the cedar boards beneath my boots. I was tightening a loose bolt on the ladder rail when I heard the crunch of gravel from the direction of my driveway. Not fast or frantic, slow, purposeful, like somebody arriving with bad intentions wrapped in a friendly tone. I straightened up just in time to see a white HOA-branded SUV roll to a stop beside my mailbox. Two people stepped out. Denise Harland, of course, clipboard already in hand, sunglasses big enough to look like armor. And beside her, adjusting a measuring tape at his belt like it was a holster, was a man I recognized from community meetings. Miles Reddick, the HOA's preferred contractor. Built like an overconfident toolbox and twice as loud. They both headed toward the dock with matching rehearsed purpose. I stood still on the planks, letting them come to me. The lake behind me was calm, but something in the air felt charged, like the moment before a summer electrical storm. "Mr. McAllister?" Denise said curtly as she approached, that same clipped tone she'd used at sunrise. "We're here for a provisional compliance inspection." Miles grinned like we were old friends, though we'd barely exchanged 5 words before today. "Morning, Evan. Gonna check this structure for you. Safety and standards. HOA protocol, you understand." I didn't answer. I just crossed my arms, careful to keep my breath steady. Miles stepped onto the dock and immediately crouched near the edge, tugging on boards, scraping the measuring tape across the planks. Every few seconds he muttered something that sounded important, but made as much sense as a rooster in a library. 3 inches over the standard edge tolerance," he said loudly, as if performing for an audience. "Your load-bearing alignment ratio's off, too." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that even a real term?" He ignored me and nudged the ladder with his boot. "Could be dangerous, could be condemned." Denise scribbled something on her clipboard with theatrical flair. Then she looked up sharply, her voice dropping into the tone of someone who enjoys hearing themselves deliver bad news. "Your dock is officially classified as a non-compliant structure, effective immediately." I kept my face still, though irritation coiled tight in my stomach. The county approved this. Every beam, every bolt. I have the stamped permits in my house. "That may be," she replied, her smile tightening. "But county permits don't supersede community standards. You're part of Lakeshore Estates now, and our rules require uniformity in all waterfront builds." She gestured toward the row of plastic-looking floating platforms owned by other residents, every one of them built by Miles. "Consistency protects property values." Ah, there it was. Her property values sermon. Always the holy scripture of a power-hungry HOA president. "And what exactly," I asked evenly, "is wrong with my dock?" Miles tapped the cedar rail with a knuckle. "Well, for starters, it's wood." I blinked. "It's a lake. Docks tend to be wood." He shrugged. "HOA prefers our standardized composite platforms. Lighter weight, uniform color, less maintenance." "More profit, you mean?" His smile faltered for a heartbeat. Denise jumped in quickly. "This dock violates multiple line-item structural expectations, not to mention obstructing the community's visual harmony." "Visual harmony," I repeated, letting the phrase hang there like a bad odor. The lake shimmered at my back, blue and ancient and older than all our rules combined. "This dock has been here for years." Nobody said a word. That was before we updated the standards, she replied sharply. New regulations require all waterfront structures to comply within 30 days of notice. You received that notice via email. I shook my head. I never got any such email. Then check your spam folder, she said, lips pursed. Your lack of organization isn't our responsibility. Behind her, the sun caught the lake just right, sending a flicker of gold across the water. For a moment it looked like the lake itself was listening. I kept my voice low. My father talked about water rights around here. Old agreements the HOA doesn't have authority over. Denise stopped writing. Miles looked up, measuring tape halfway extended. What agreements? She asked, tone suddenly clipped and cautious. I'm not sure yet, I said, but I intend to find out. Her eyes narrowed. Whatever rumors your father heard are irrelevant. This lake is governed by the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association. Period. You will remove this dock within 48 hours. She turned sharply, signaling for Miles to follow. He rolled up his tape, gave me a smirk meant to intimidate, then trudged after her. Before stepping off the dock, Denise paused and looked back over her shoulder. You're making this harder than it needs to be. It's just a dock. I stared at her, then at the violation notice in my hand, its red lettering glaring in the sunlight. Just a dock. It was the last piece of my father's legacy, the thing we built together, plank by plank, learning the lake's moods as we worked. And now this woman was treating it like scrap lumber in her way. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something steady. As they walked away, the lake carried their reflections across the surface, warping them into strange shapes. I looked down at the notice again. If the HOA didn't control the lake, then who did? The wind brushed against the pines, whispering like it had secrets it was finally ready to share. And I knew this wasn't just about a dock anymore. This was the start of something much bigger. The next morning, thin sheets of frost clung to the cedar boards, making them glitter pale blue under the rising sun. I stepped outside with my coffee, boots crunching on the gravel path. The air had that crisp, metallic bite Montana mornings get right before winter starts sniffing around the edges of fall. It should have been peaceful, but the peace didn't make it to my porch. Somebody had been there before me. A stack of glossy HOA flyers lay scattered like dead leaves across the steps. Bold letters screamed from the front page. Unsafe, non-standard dock endangers our community. There was even a small, grainy picture of my dock, crooked, zoomed in, and darkened just enough to make it look like something out of a cautionary safety pamphlet. I crouched down, picking up one of the flyers. The edges were still cold, meaning they'd been dropped within the hour, probably under cover of dawn. Beneath the headline, smaller text read, Homeowner irresponsibility threatens the lakefront lifestyle. Report concerns immediately. A hotline number followed. My number, no, but close enough for folks not paying attention to dial mine anyway. A truck door slammed next door. Grant Holloway, my 62-year-old neighbor, stood in his yard scratching his beard, a mug steaming in his hand. Saw them posting those, he called over. Denise's board cronies, the tall one and the woman with the red scarf, didn't look like they were out for morning exercise. I walked over, holding one of the flyers. You see which way they headed? Toward the cul-de-sac, he said. Looked mighty proud of themselves, too, like kids who just egged a house. A tight breath escaped me. They're escalating fast. Grant took the flyer and snorted. Son, that dock of yours is stronger than any plastic platform on this lake. If that thing is unsafe, then I'm a ballet dancer. I tried to smile, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Grant must have seen it in my face because he tapped his mug against his leg thoughtfully. Your father ever tell you about the old agreements out here? Folks around the lake used to talk. Bits and pieces, I said. Nothing concrete. You might want to dig deeper, he murmured. This HOA didn't always run things. The lake used to have its own rules. Before I could ask him more, my phone buzzed. An HOA email notification. Subject line: immediate attention required. Reckless construction activity. I didn't even need to open it to know the narrative had spread. I walked back to the dock to check it for myself, running my hands along the railing. The wood was cold beneath my palms, the grain familiar beneath my fingertips. Every knot, every groove. I'd built this thing with my father. It wasn't just a structure. It was history. And then I saw it. A section of the dock near the far corner, just where the ladder met the water, looked splintered, rough, wrong. I knelt, brushing the edges with my thumb. Fresh break. Not natural. Someone had taken something sharp, a boot heel, a tool, something, and jammed it into the wood. Not enough to break it completely, but enough to weaken the joint. Sabotage, plain and simple. I let the cold morning wind fill the silence, steadying myself. Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp, but I kept it contained. I'd learned long ago that anger used wrong just made you sloppy, and sloppy didn't win fights, especially not legal ones. I stood up and walked back toward the house. The frost on the grass crunched beneath my steps, but the sound barely reached me. I went straight to the tool shed and pulled out a small metal case. Inside were 2 wireless security cameras, still in their packaging. I'd bought them months ago, but never needed to install them. Now I did. By noon, they were mounted, one facing the path from the road, another watching the dock from the tree line. I checked the live feed on my phone. The angles were clean. Anyone stepping foot near that dock would be seen. As I tightened the last mount, a low rumble echoed from up the hill. A group of residents walked past, dressed for morning strolls but watching me with thin, judging eyes. One whispered something to another. A woman in a blue jacket clutched her coffee cup tighter and turned away sharply. The rumor machine was officially running. I tried not to let it get to me, but the weight of their stares dug deep. It's one thing to be disliked. It's another to be painted as a danger to your own community. The flyers, the emails, the whispered conversations, they weren't random. They were strategic. I headed back to the porch, pulled open my mailbox, and found a fresh white envelope with the HOA seal stamped on the corner. Inside was a printed letter. Failure to comply with immediate dock removal may result in escalating fines. Any further modifications or attempts to reinforce the structure will be considered defiance of HOA directives. I let the letter fall to my side. They weren't just after the dock. They were after control. The cold air tugged at the hem of my jacket, and the lake behind me reflected a sky turning steel gray. A storm was brewing, literal or not, I couldn't tell, but everything in my chest knew this wasn't going to blow over. That evening, long after the sun had slipped behind the mountains and the lake turned dark as ink, my cameras chimed softly. Motion detected. I checked the screen. 2 figures walked near the end of the dock, hoods up, flashlights off, moving slow. Just silhouettes. But one of them had the same posture, the same swagger, as Miles Reddick. They didn't break anything this time. Just inspected, took pictures, left. Like predators circling before deciding how to strike. I watched until they were gone, the night swallowing them whole. Something cold settled in my chest. But it wasn't fear. Not anymore. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. But not the kind they expected. Because this wasn't just about a dock. It was about what lay beneath it, around it, and maybe, just maybe, what had always belonged to my family. One thing was certain. Tonight, the lake whispered louder, and it was telling me to keep going. By morning, the wind had shifted. It carried the scent of cold river stone and pine sap, clean, sharp, like something waiting to be uncovered. I drank my coffee on the porch while watching the dock sit quiet, the early sun turning the frost into tiny mirrors. The cameras hadn't picked up more movement overnight. Whoever had been skulking around understood I was watching now. But the dock wasn't the question anymore. The real question sat deeper, beneath the boards, beneath the waterline, beneath the decades. So I grabbed my truck keys and a folder with my father's old property notes. Half-legible handwriting, dog-eared survey maps, yellowing receipts for cedar wood and rust-proof bolts, and headed toward the county seat. McAllister Lake sits 25 minutes outside the town of Garnet Ridge, a place where time moves slower than traffic. The drive curves along dense lodgepole forests, then breaks open into wide views of the valley. Big sky stretching so far east it looks like the world's edge sits right on the horizon. Dust rose in little clouds behind my tires as I pulled into the gravel lot of the county records building, a squat structure of tan stone and faded green trim. Inside smelled like old paper and cooler air that hummed from vents older than I was. "Morning, Evan," called a voice from behind the counter. Dolores Martinez, county records clerk since before most of the residents at Lakeshore Estates were born. She wore her usual thick glasses, her hair pinned loosely with a fountain pen stuck through it. "What brings you in? Not property tax time yet?" I held up the folder. "Looking for historical documents. Lake ownership, old dam permits, anything tied to McAllister Lake or the original watershed." She raised an eyebrow. "Your family's land?" "Yeah." She studied my face, reading more than I said. "This about the HOA trouble?" "They're claiming authority over water," I said. "I'm not convinced they ever had any." Her mouth tugged into a grin. "Well, sweetheart, let's find out." She turned, grabbed a ring of keys big enough to anchor a fishing boat, and motioned for me to follow. The back room was lined with metal filing cabinets, towering, dented from decades of elbows and dropped boxes. The sunlight barely made it through the dusty windows, catching floating particles like a slow-moving snowstorm inside the stale air. Dolores unlocked a cabinet drawer labeled Crest Creek Dam Projects, early 1900s. "These records go back to when the county first started messing with that watershed," she said. "Back before HOAs even existed." She flipped through folders with practiced efficiency, humming softly as she dug deeper. Finally, she pulled out a thick, yellowed file with a rusted metal clasp. "Morrison, McAllister, Holloway," she murmured. "All the old families tied to the lake. Here we go." She laid the file on the reading table. The paper crackled as I opened it. Handwritten engineering schematics, notes in pencil, and a map drawn in charcoal ink showing the original creek channel, dam outline, and the property boundaries that existed almost a century ago. My eyes locked onto one line written in ink darker than the rest, underlined twice. "Perpetual water management rights assigned to E. McAllister, 1924. A cold ripple ran down my spine. Dolores leaned in. "See that? Your grandfather's initials. This isn't common. Counties don't hand out perpetual anything unless they're desperate." I scanned the documents. The more I read, the clearer the story became. The original dam had been engineered partially by my grandfather, who'd designed the overflow channels and safety gates. In exchange for private funding and land access, the county granted long-term authority over the water system, including maintenance, shoreline structures, and tributary rights. Not to the public, not to an agency, to my family. "It says here," Dolores continued, tapping a line with her fingernail, "that any future developments, communities, or associations must acquire written authorization from the holder of the water rights." I stared at the line until the letters blurred. "So the HOA never got permission. And legally?" She pushed her glasses up her nose. "They don't have a drop of authority over that lake." The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of 90-year-old ink filling the air like static. Dolores wasn't finished. She pulled another bundle of papers from a separate folder, maintenance logs, correspondence between county engineers, and a ledger of Watergate inspections. Each one bore a signature, EM or JM. My grandfather, then my father. And finally, at the bottom, transfer of rights to Evan James McAllister. Recorded 1999. The breath left my lungs. My father had transferred the rights to me the same year he had his heart attack. I'd been too young then to understand the paperwork he shoved at me in the lawyer's office, too shocked to grasp anything beyond grief. I steadied my hand on the table's edge. They can't regulate my dock. They can't regulate anything, Dolores said. Not the docks, not the water levels, not even the boat traffic. They've been operating under the assumption the lake was community property. She looked me in the eye, voice lowering. But legally? That lake, and its entire water system, is yours to manage. Outside, a gust rattled the thin windows. Dust shimmered in the beam of light cutting across the table. I swallowed hard. If I bring this to them, they won't accept it. They'll fight. Oh, honey, she said, patting my arm. Of course they'll fight. Bullies always fight when someone stronger stands up. I nodded slowly. Then she handed me copies, certified, stamped, sealed. Documents that felt heavier than their weight, evidence inked long before Denise Harland ever bought her lakefront home. When I stepped back outside, the wind had shifted again, colder, sharper. My truck door creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing across the quiet lot. As I sat there with those documents on the passenger seat, a new kind of tension settled in my chest. Not fear, but clarity. I knew exactly how deep the HOA's false authority went now, and I knew exactly where to strike first. The lake didn't whisper this time. It waited. By the time I drove back into Lakeshore Estates, the sky had shifted from a bright Montana blue to a dull steel gray. Storm clouds trailed lazily over the mountains, hinting at the kind of weather that creeps in slow, then hits hard. Fitting, I thought. Nature had a sense of timing that made the HOA look like amateurs. I pulled into my driveway. More flyers were scattered across my porch, this time laminated, as if the HOA expected rain and wanted their warnings to survive the storm. The headline color had changed from red to a more dramatic blood orange. Dramatic people love dramatic ink. I ignored them and walked straight down to the dock, the papers from the county tucked safely in a waterproof envelope under my arm. The cedar planks were dry but cool, and I took a moment to kneel, pressing my palm against the wood. Old habit. My father used to say you could feel the truth of a thing better with your hands than your eyes. The truth of this dock? It wasn't going anywhere. Footsteps crunched behind me. I turned. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of my yard. 6 or 7 neighbors bundled in fleece jackets, holding their coffee cups like shields. Their expressions ranged from uneasy to hostile. Conversations hushed when I looked up. The storm overhead seemed to fall silent just to listen. "Morning," I said, standing. No one answered. Then one woman, a brunette from 2 houses down, stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly. "We got an HOA alert this morning," she said. "Says your dock failed a safety review. Says it could collapse and drag someone into the water." I exhaled slowly. "That's false." Another neighbor shook his head. "They said you refused to take corrective action, that you're endangering the community." "The community," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of how easily people buy a lie. "Did they also mention the part where they damaged the dock themselves?" That got them whispering, quiet, uneasy, flickering glances from one to another. None of them stepped closer, but none walked away either. It told me everything. They weren't loyal to the HOA, just scared of it. Before I could say more, a familiar silver SUV turned the corner, moving slower than usual. The vehicle stopped by my mailbox, and the driver's door swung open. Of course. Denise Harlan stepped out wearing a tailored black coat and a confident smile that didn't reach her eyes. A thick binder was tucked under her arm, and walking beside her, clipboard and tape measure ready, was none other than Miles Reddick. I felt the air tighten. "Mr. McAllister?" Denise called out, approaching with brisk, determined steps. "Good. You're here. We've called an emergency HOA meeting. You're expected to attend." I crossed my arms. "On what grounds?" "On grounds of community welfare," she said. "Your unauthorized structure is becoming a neighborhood hazard. We have unanimous board concern and multiple resident complaints." I glanced at the neighbors behind her. Several avoided my eyes. "You mean the complaints you stirred up?" I said quietly. Her jaw tightened. "Don't make this more complicated. We're giving you the opportunity to explain yourself before the board votes on escalating fines. And foreclosure action," Miles added from behind her, "if the violations persist." Something hot flared in my chest, but I forced my voice steady. "You don't have the authority to foreclose on a lakefront property over a dock." "We have broader authority than you think," Denise said sharply, "and we intend to enforce it." That was the moment I understood one simple truth. This wasn't about the dock anymore. Not to them either. This was about power, about someone who'd gotten used to people backing down when she raised her voice, but I wasn't backing down. I reached into the waterproof envelope and pulled out a copy of the 1924 water rights transfer. I didn't hand it to her yet. Not yet. Timing mattered in fights like this. "Denise," I said calmly, "you're pushing something you don't understand, and you're overstepping in ways that are going to cause you legal problems." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Legal problems? Please. Mr. McAllister, you've clearly misunderstood the role of this homeowners association. We set standards. We manage the waterfront. We protect property values." "Under whose authority?" I asked. "Ours," she snapped. The neighbors murmured again. Miles stepped forward. "Look, Evan, no need to make this a big deal. Just tear down the dock, go through our approved builder." He tapped his chest, subtle as a flashing billboard, "and we'll have you compliant in no time." So that was the angle. Profit wrapped in regulation. I took a breath, slow and steady. "No." Denise's eyes flashed. "Then the emergency meeting will proceed as scheduled, and given your refusal to comply, we'll need to review further enforcement measures." "What time?" I asked. "Tonight, 7 p.m. CT to our community hall. Don't be late." She turned sharply and walked back toward her SUV, Miles trailing behind her. The neighbors dispersed soon after, whispering as they went, their breath forming little clouds in the cold air. When they were gone, I stood alone on the dock, looking at the envelope in my hand. The papers inside felt heavier than they should, like holding the spine of the lake itself. I could have shown the documents right then, ended the argument, shut down their threats. But something in me said to wait. Let them build their case. Let them put every false claim in writing. Let them believe they had the upper hand. Because when the truth dropped, it needed to drop hard enough to leave a crater. The sky darkened further, the wind picking up, sending ripples across the lake. The storm was close now, close enough to smell the rain in the air. I took one last look at the dock, sturdy against the gathering wind. Tonight's meeting would be the beginning of the end. For someone. And for the first time since this started, I hoped it wouldn't be me. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of hammered steel. Clouds rolled over the valley, slow and heavy, swallowing the mountaintops as if trying to quiet the world before the storm. The wind barreled through the treetops, carrying the scent of rain and cold stone. The lake's surface, once glass smooth, had begun to ripple in long gray lines. The HOA emergency meeting was hours away. I spent most of the day preparing, not with anger, not with speeches, but with silence. The kind of silence that lets a man think clearly, breathe evenly, and line up every piece on the board before the first move. Inside my cabin, documents were spread across the dining table like a battlefield map. Copies of the 1924 Water Rights Agreement, engineering blueprints, maintenance logs, and the rights transfer my father signed just before he passed. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and dust, like history trying to remind me it was alive. I reviewed each page carefully, underlining key lines, marking sections with sticky notes. Everything I needed was here. Everything they didn't expect. Still, I wanted someone else to look at it, someone who knew the law the way I knew water systems, so I called her. Clara Bishop's voice came through the line steady as bedrock. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to her word, a silver sedan pulled into my driveway just as the first spatters of rain peppered the roof. Clara stepped out wearing a long charcoal coat and carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than both of us. She walked with a deliberate confidence. No wasted motion, no uncertainty. "Show me everything," she said as soon as she stepped inside. I laid out the documents. She moved through them with the precision of a surgeon, her fingers brushing lightly over the pages as she read. Occasionally she nodded. More often her eyebrows climbed higher. When she reached the water management clause, she let out a low whistle. "Evan, this isn't just a property right," she murmured. "This is jurisdiction." I folded my arms. "Meaning?" "Meaning the HOA has no legal authority to regulate so much as a canoe on this lake without your written consent." She tapped the paper. "And they've been issuing fines, rules, and permits illegally for years." The rain picked up outside, rattling the window frames. Clara continued, "The smart play isn't to fight them emotionally. It's to let them overextend themselves. Let them put every unfounded accusation on record. Let them violate due process. The more they talk, the deeper the hole they dig." I nodded. "The meeting's at 7. "You'll attend," she said. "Calm. Document everything. If they try to bully or corner you, don't react. I'll step in if needed." Before she left, she placed a hand on the envelope containing the originals. "Evan, these papers give you leverage most people never get in their lifetime. But leverage only works if you stay steady." Steady. That was the word I needed. After Clara drove off, twilight settled over the lake. The storm clouds grew darker, thicker, pressing low enough to touch the tops of the pines. A hush fell over everything, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Sheriff Wes Calhoun pulled into my drive soon after. He stepped out of his cruiser holding his hat in one hand, rain tapping softly against the brim. "Heard there's a meeting tonight," he said. "HOA wants to escalate," I replied. "Threatening fines, foreclosure, the whole show." Wes studied my face with the kind of patience only lawmen and old dogs have. "You need anything from me?" "Just awareness," I said. "Things are tightening." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye out. But Evan, just remember, HOA meetings ain't the law. They want people to think they are, but they're not." "I know," I said quietly. "I'm ready." When he left, the air felt even heavier. I walked down to the dock one last time before heading to the community hall. Rain had darkened the cedar, turning the planks a deep russet brown. The lake churned gently, waves tapping against the supports like a heartbeat. I placed my hand on the rail, letting the cold, water-soaked wood seep into my palm. My father used to say that McAllister Lake didn't belong to anybody. Not really. You don't own water, you steward it, guide it, respect it. But tonight wasn't about stewardship. Tonight was about truth. I locked the documents in my truck, double-checked the cameras, and took a long breath of the storm-thickened air. At exactly 6:20 p.m., I stepped off the dock, the wind whipping my jacket behind me, and headed toward the meeting that would decide more than the fate of a few boards of cedar. It would decide who truly held power here. As I drove, the community center lights glowed through sheets of rain, bright, harsh, and waiting. The storm outside mirrored the one brewing inside, and I walked straight into it, steady as the rails on my dock. Rain slapped the hood of my jacket in cold, hard bursts as I crossed the parking lot. The community center stood under buzzing yellow floodlights, its wood siding darkened by weather. Most of the neighborhood was already inside. Their cars formed a tight, nervous circle around the building. Wipers clicked, windows fogged, and a few latecomers hurried in, collars pulled high against the wind. When I opened the door, a low murmur filled the hall like the hum of an anxious hive. Rows of plastic chairs faced the front where a long folding table sat. HOA Central Command. Denise Harlan stood behind it, blotting raindrops off her blazer with sharp, irritated swipes. Beside her sat two board members flipping through binders. And just off to the side, Miles Reddick leaned against the wall, arms crossed, wearing the smug look of a man who thought he'd already won. A projector screen behind them read, "Emergency Session, Dock Safety and Community Enforcement." Subtle. I took a seat in the second row, enough to see clearly, not close enough to look eager. The room smelled of damp coats, burnt coffee, and the faint tang of permanent marker. At exactly 7, Denise tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice crisp and confident, "thank you for attending this urgent community meeting. We are here to address a serious threat to our lakefront safety and property values." Several neighbors nodded automatically. Others glanced around, uncertain. A few avoided looking toward me entirely. Denise continued, flipping a page in her binder. "One homeowner has repeatedly refused to comply with basic safety standards. Despite multiple notices, he continues to maintain a dangerous and unauthorized dock structure." A projector slide flashed up. An edited photo of my dock, darkened to make the wood look warped. I clenched my jaw but stayed silent. "This non-compliance threatens the welfare of all of us," she said. "And as HOA president, my duty is to protect this community. Tonight, we will vote on escalating enforcement, up to and including property lien placement." A ripple of whispers filled the room. Rain hammered the roof harder, punctuating every lie she spoke. Denise narrowed her eyes. "Before we proceed, Mr. McAllister will have the opportunity to speak." I rose slowly, feeling every eye settle on me. The storm's rumble echoed through the walls as I approached the podium. "Evening," I said simply. A few people returned the greeting. Most waited, curious, suspicious, uneasy. I rested my hands on the podium. "I've listened to the HOA's concerns. I've heard the accusations. But none of this," I gestured toward the screen, "matches the truth." Miles scoffed loudly. Denise shot him a warning glare. I continued, voice steady. "My dock was built legally, inspected by the county, permitted and approved. The only people who examined it and declared it unsafe are the ones trying to force me to confound their business." Several heads turned toward Miles. "Good." "But," I said, "this isn't about safety or harmony or any of the words you've heard tonight." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single manila folder, the same type my grandfather used when storing deeds in his old roll-top desk. "This is about authority." A hush fell over the room. "When my grandfather helped design this lake's original water system," I said, "the county granted our family perpetual water management rights." I opened the folder and placed a certified copy of the 1924 agreement on the podium. A few people leaned forward, squinting. "This document," I went on, "predates Lakeshore Estates, predates the HOA, predates most of the homes around this lake. It states clearly that any structure, activity, or regulation affecting this water requires written authorization from the holder of these rights. I raised my eyes to meet Denise's. And that holder is me. A thunderclap struck outside, shaking the lights. Denise's confidence cracked for the first time. She stepped forward. Those papers can't be accurate. They're outdated, irrelevant to modern HOA governance. I slid another page forward. Recorded again in 1999 when my father transferred them. Verified this morning by the county clerk. She sputtered. HOAs have jurisdiction, not over water rights, a calm voice cut in. Heads turned. Sheriff Wes Calhoun stood in the back, arms crossed, rain dripping from his hat. Clara Bishop was beside him, holding her leather briefcase. Wes stepped forward. I've reviewed the documents. They're legitimate. He nodded toward the audience. And for the record, an HOA can't override county-recognized water rights agreements. Not even a little. A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Surprise, doubt, relief, depending on who you looked at. Clara joined me at the podium. She placed 2 more certified letters beside the deed. Ladies and gentlemen, these filings confirm that the HOA has no legal authority over docks, boat activity, or shoreline construction on this lake. Any enforcement actions taken against Mr. McAllister on these grounds are invalid. Denise's face reddened. This is absurd! He's manipulating old paperwork. Clara lifted a hand. The law is the law, Mrs. Harland, and your board has been acting outside of it. Miles pushed off the wall, pointing at me. So what? He owns the water now? I met his glare. I don't own the lake. I'm responsible for it. Big difference. The room went utterly silent. Clara turned toward the neighbors. Any fines issued related to water access, dock design, or lake use are unenforceable. If the HOA continues these actions, they may face liability. The meaning sank in like a stone dropped in deep water. Denise's composure shattered. You're ruining this community, she snapped. One man cannot hold us hostage with century-old documents. Wes stepped closer, voice low but firm. Nobody's holding anyone hostage. We're just making sure things are done legally. The storm outside hit full force, wind howling against the siding. I stepped back from the podium. I'm not here to fight my neighbors, but I won't be bullied, and I won't let the law be ignored. Not by anyone. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then one of the board members, a man named Thompson, stood. His voice trembled slightly. I didn't know the HOA didn't have authority. I think we should pause enforcement. Another board member nodded. Agreed. But not Denise. Her eyes burned like an oil fire. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. Miles muttered under his breath. We'll see about that. They gathered their papers, stiff and rattled, and stormed out of the hall. The room slowly emptied, neighbors avoiding eye contact, trying to process the shift in power. Wes tipped his hat at me. You handled that well. Clara closed her briefcase with a soft click. They'll strike back, but now they'll have to do it without pretending they own the lake. I exhaled long and slow, the weight of the moment easing off my chest. But the storm, both kinds, wasn't done, because the look in Denise's eyes wasn't defeat. It was desperation. And desperation, in people like her, always leads to a new kind of trouble. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving a thin mist drifting off the lake and a faint smell of wet pine hanging low in the air. The world looked washed clean, but I knew better. Storms don't end things. They shift them. I walked down to the dock with a thermos of fresh coffee, the gravel damp beneath my boots. The cedar planks glistened, rainwater still caught in their grooves. I ran my hand along the railing, checking the spot that had been damaged earlier in the week. The break looked unchanged, no new splintering. But something else caught my eye. The water level was lower. Not drastically, just a few inches. but enough that the ladder rungs at the end of the dock sat higher than usual. Enough that the mudline along the shore looked freshly exposed. Enough for a man who grew up on this lake to know something had been tampered with. The inlet gate. A gust of wind pushed a small wave against the dock post, splashing the lower step. I felt a cold, sinking certainty settle in my chest. Somebody had lowered the water level on purpose. My phone buzzed. Security cam alert. Movement near the inlet. I opened the feed. There they were. 3 figures in the early light. Their silhouettes stretched long across the cement channel, hunched, hurried, working on the gate crank. 2 I didn't recognize. The third? The posture alone gave him away. Miles Reddick. I breathed out through my teeth, slow and steady. This wasn't some harmless HOA stunt now. Tampering with water infrastructure, especially one tied to a decades-old county flood control system, was dangerous business. Not just illegal. Reckless. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and sprinted for the truck. The drive around the lake was a short one. Dusty in summer, slick after rain. Today it was slick. My tires threw mud behind me as I pulled up to the chain gate that blocked access to the inlet path. The gate hung open, swinging lazily in the wind. They hadn't even tried to hide it. I stepped out, boots sinking into soft, rain-soaked earth. Leaves clung to the ground in soggy piles. The inlet roared faintly ahead, a narrow, concrete-lined channel feeding the lake, hidden beneath a canopy of old cottonwoods. When I rounded the corner, the gate came into view. The crank mechanism groaned as 2 men struggled with a rusted wheel, trying to force it another inch lower. Miles stood over them, gesturing angrily, his voice rising in the morning air. "Just a little more," he barked. "The water has to drop enough for the inspector to declare the dock unstable. Denise wants photos by noon." I stepped onto the path, the crunch of gravel loud enough to cut through their conspiracy. All 3 turned. Miles froze first. His hands dropped to his sides, eyes going wide. "Evan. Morning," he stammered. "We're just checking structural—" "Stop talking," I said. My voice was low, controlled, but the look in his eyes told me he heard the steel underneath. "You're lowering the lake," I continued, stepping closer. "Without authorization, without county oversight, without any regard for what this inlet controls." One of the men swallowed hard. We were told—" "You were told to commit a felony," I snapped. "Do you have any idea what happens if this gate is misadjusted? Flooding downstream, damage to property, safety hazards, and the county will trace tampering right back here." Miles tried to recover his composure. "It's temporary. We'll bring it up again after—" I pulled out my phone and held up the screen. It showed the live security footage time-stamped from 20 minutes earlier. Their faces drained of color. "I have everything recorded," I said. "Every crank, every adjustment, every word." Miles stepped forward, hands raised as if trying to calm an animal. "Now hold on. There's no reason to escalate this. Let's talk, man to man." "There is," I said, "and we will." I dialed Sheriff Wes Calhoun. "Mornin'," Wes answered on the second ring. "Everything all right?" "You need to come to the inlet," I said. "Tampering, 3 people. I have footage." A long pause. "On my way." The 2 men beside Miles started backing away. Miles muttered something under his breath. Something about Denise handling the fallout. But he didn't run. He stayed rooted to the spot, jaw tight, like he couldn't tell whether to be proud of what he'd done or terrified. Thunder rumbled far off, though the sky was mostly clear now. Within minutes, Wes's cruiser rolled up, blue lights quiet but unmistakable. He stepped out, surveyed the scene, and shook his head. "Morning, gentlemen. Anyone want to explain why you're adjusting a water control gate without county authorization?" The 2 workers pointed at Miles in unison. Miles sputtered. It was maintenance." HOA approved adjustments. Nothing serious. Wes raised an eyebrow. Maintenance? Funny. The county says only one person has the right to adjust this system. He turned toward me. And it's not you, Miles. When Wes reviewed the footage, the situation moved quickly. Citations, statements, documentation, legal warnings, paperwork. Through it all, Miles kept glancing at me like I'd personally engineered his downfall. When the sheriff finally escorted them away, the inlet path fell quiet again, just the soft gurgle of water returning to normal levels. I walked to the edge of the concrete, leaning over to check the flow. The water surged steady, righting itself, as if grateful someone was paying attention. Behind me, Wes approached. "They're in trouble," he said simply. "You know that." "They were trying to fake a safety hazard," I replied, "to destroy my dock." He nodded. "Desperation makes fools do stupid things. But documentation?" He tapped the phone in my hand. "Documentation wins." The wind pushed a fresh wave of cool air off the lake. It carried the scent of wet earth and pine and something else. Justice, maybe. The beginnings of it. I took a long breath. This was just Miles. "Yeah," Wes said, fastening his hat. "But Denise? She's gonna be worse." I looked back toward the lake, its surface returning to normal height. Sunlight breaking over it in clean gold streaks. Wes was right. Desperation wasn't the end. It was the warning. And Denise Harland hadn't even begun to show how far she'd go. The morning after Miles was caught tampering with the inlet, the air felt different. Thin, sharp, like the valley was holding its breath. A light frost coated the pine needles, shimmering under the pale sun. McAllister Lake sat unmoving, a wide sheet of cold blue glass, pretending everything was normal. But the HOA wasn't pretending. Before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, the neighborhood group chat started buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. My phone lit up with message after message. New HOA notice, urgent. Emergency board decision. Water fees suspended? Is the HOA being sued? I stepped onto the porch just in time to hear a car door slam next door. Grant Holloway shuffled toward me, the brim of his old canvas hat pulled low. "You see the email blast?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just woke up." Grant waved his phone. "Whole community's in an uproar. Denise is trying to spin what happened at the inlet. Says the sheriff interfered with HOA maintenance. Folks ain't buying it this time." "Because she overplayed her hand," I said. Grant nodded. "And because some people still remember your granddad. Remember the old agreements." He wasn't wrong. But this wasn't about memory anymore. This was about proof and consequences. By midday, Sheriff Wes stopped by. He looked tired. Not physically. Wes never looked physically tired. But the kind of tired a man gets when he's dealing with too much nonsense and not enough common sense. "Got updates for you," he said, stepping inside. "You want the short version or the long?" "Give me the truth," I said. "Whatever length it comes in." He set a stack of printed forms on the table. County seal stamped across each one. "Tampering with the inlet triggered a mandatory reporting chain," he said. "County engineers reviewed your footage. Confirmed the gate was manually lowered without authorization. Confirmed it posed risk of downstream overflow. Confirmed the HOA had no jurisdiction." I nodded slowly. He continued. "They also dug deeper. Turns out the HOA's been charging water usage fees for years, filing them as mandatory assessments, all without any right to do so." "That's fraud," I said quietly. "Yup." Wes tapped the top sheet. "And this morning the county commissioner officially petitioned for an investigation into unauthorized regulation, forged compliance notices, and misuse of HOA funds." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Denise?" I asked. "Called into the county office an hour ago," Wes said. "Stormed out 10 minutes later. Word is she tried claiming the HOA had implied rights to the lake." I let out a humorless breath. "Implied?" "She waved around binders, Evan. Actual binders, and none of it mattered." I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. The storm clouds of the last week had finally begun to crack. "What about Miles?" I asked. "County revoked his contractor license pending investigation," Wes said. "He's barred from all community work until further notice." It was the closest I'd ever seen Wes come to smiling. Around 2 in the afternoon, the HOA called another mandatory emergency meeting. This time, I didn't walk in alone. Clara met me in the parking lot, her briefcase in hand, coat collar pulled up against the biting wind. A faint dusting of snow filtered from the low clouds, Montana's reminder that winter was never far. Inside, the hall looked different. The projector was off. The lights felt harsher. The chairs were half empty. People whispered in clumps, glancing at Denise, who sat rigid behind the folding table, fingers tapping a rapid, nervous rhythm. Miles was absent. Denise cleared her throat. "We will begin. Due to recent misinformation..." Clara didn't let her finish. "Mrs. Harland," she said warmly, stepping forward, "before any proceedings, the county has asked me to deliver an official notice." The room went silent. Clara placed a thick envelope on the table in front of Denise. "This is a cease and desist order regarding all HOA activities related to water regulation, dock enforcement, shoreline assessments, and fee collection." Whispers rippled through the room like a wind sweeping across tall grass. "And," Clara continued, "the county is voiding all HOA water-related regulations effective immediately. Any funds collected under those regulations must be refunded." A board member gasped. Denise's face turned a deep, mottled red. "This is outrageous! You can't—" "The law can," Clara said gently. "Not me!" Denise stood abruptly, her chair scraping hard against the floor. "This is a coordinated attack, a smear campaign by disgruntled residents. Our HOA has authority—" "No," I said quietly. "It never did." She spun toward me, eyes blazing. "You undermined us. I showed the truth. You embarrassed me." "It wasn't personal," I said. "You made it personal when you tried to seize my property." The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a timid man with silver glasses, finally spoke. We didn't know about the water rights," he murmured. "We trusted you, Denise." Another nodded. "We thought we were following proper procedure." The silence that followed was painful, the kind of silence that signals the end of a kingdom. Clara tapped the notice gently. "Mrs. Harland, the county expects full cooperation. Non-compliance will trigger legal penalties." Denise's voice broke. "I was trying to protect this place. I was trying to keep things orderly." At that moment, she looked less like a tyrant and more like someone watching her empire crumble one brick at a time. But pity wasn't an option. Not after everything she'd done. Wes stepped forward. "Mrs. Harland, I'm going to need you to come with me. County investigators want to talk today." Gasps echoed through the room. Denise's eyes widened. "Are you arresting me?" "No, ma'am," Wes said kindly. "You're being asked to cooperate." She hesitated, then gathered her papers with trembling hands and followed him out. The hall remained silent long after the door closed behind them. Then the Silver Glasses board member turned to me. "Mr. McAllister, what happens to the lake now?" I took a slow breath. "We rebuild. We correct the wrongs. We restore what should have been respected from the start." The man nodded, relief flooding his features. As the meeting dissolved, neighbors approached me, some quietly, some with awkward smiles, offering thanks, apologies, or simple nods of understanding. Outside, the snow had stopped. A thin layer dusted the tops of the evergreens. The air smelled like cold water and clean slate. The lake waited, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, it was free of false authority. But one question still hovered. What would become of the dock that started it all? I walked toward home with the answer forming slowly. It would stand. By the time I reached my porch, the late afternoon sun had dipped low enough to cast long, amber streaks across McAllister Lake. The water looked calm, too calm for everything that had just happened. A few geese skimmed the surface, leaving gentle ripples behind them. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Stillness. Not the kind you get before a storm, or the kind that comes after a fight. A real, honest stillness. I stepped onto my dock, the cedar boards warm from the fading sun. Even with the damage from the sabotage, the structure held firm beneath my boots. The lake breeze carried a scent of pine and cold water, and for the first time since Denise Harlan stepped onto these planks, my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the shoreline. "That dock's got good bones," a voice called from up the slope. Grant hollowed his hands around a mug of something steaming. "Your granddad would have liked seeing it today." I gave a nod. "It'll be better when I'm done." "You'll get it there," he said, "and the lake'll thank you for it." When he left, I stood alone for a long time, listening to the water lap gently against the posts. The lake didn't offer advice. It didn't whisper. It didn't warn. It simply existed. Patient, steady, eternal. And now, finally, free. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Frost covered the grass like powdered sugar, and the mountains carved sharp silhouettes against a pale blue sky. I loaded my tools, new planks, a sander, fresh brass bolts, into the bed of my old Ford, and headed down to the dock. By mid-morning, the sun had warmed the boards enough for me to start work. Each sweep of the sander brought the cedar back to life, the grain showing itself like the rings of a story passed down through generations. Clack, 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 the sound of rebuilding, the sound of reclaiming. Around noon, a truck engine hummed up my driveway. Sheriff Wes Calhoun stepped out, carrying a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. He raised one. "Peace offering? Or congratulations? Not sure what this counts as." "Both works," I said, taking the cup. He leaned against a support post, taking in the view. "County finalized its recommendations this morning. Water rights, management authority, historic oversight, all recognized under your name, official and sealed." I exhaled slowly. "So it's done." "It's done," he confirmed. HOA water regulations are void permanently. Fraud case against Denise is moving forward. Miles won't hold a contractor's license in this county ever again. And folks around here are, well, grateful. He nudged my shoulder. "You did the right thing, even when it got real messy." I stared out at the distant snowcaps. Wasn't about being right. It was about protecting what belongs to this lake and the people around it. Wes nodded. "And you did." He left shortly after, leaving behind the faint smell of department-issued coffee and pine sap. I went back to work, tightening bolts, setting new posts, fitting the bench I'd promised myself would sit here one day. A memorial bench, for quiet mornings, for slow sunsets, for remembering what matters. In the late afternoon, Clara Bishop's Subaru rolled in, crunching over the gravel. She walked down the slope with her coat wrapped tight, her breath visible in the cold air. "Looks good," she said, inspecting the rebuilt corner. "Feels good," I replied. She placed a folder on the newly installed bench. "This is the foundation charter, the lake stewardship plan we talked about. It outlines community involvement, preservation guidelines, visitor rules, under your authority." I opened it. Inside were pages of carefully written proposals, community suggestions, environmental notes, wildlife preservation steps. "You're creating something bigger than a dock," she said gently. "You're creating a legacy." I sat on the bench, letting the wood settle beneath me. This place deserves to be protected, not controlled, not exploited. Clara smiled. "Exactly why you're the right person to lead it." We watched the lake in silence for a while. The water reflected the evening sky, a mix of fading gold and deepening blue. Somewhere across the shore, a lone hawk called out, its cry echoing through the valley. Before she left, Clara placed her hand on the backrest of the bench. "Call me if you need anything. Truly." "I will," I said. She walked back up the hill as the sun finally dipped behind the ridge. By the end of the week, the entire dock was rebuilt. Stronger, smoother, reinforced, and stained a warm honey gold that glowed at sunset. Neighbors came by in small groups, some with cookies, some with offers to help, and some with simple apologies. One older man, who had kept quiet through the entire HOA conflict, placed his hat over his heart and said, "Thank you for standing up, for all of us." Another woman hesitated on my porch, then offered a shy smile. "My husband and I, we didn't know what was happening. We should have paid more attention. Thank you for protecting the lake." And maybe the moment that meant the most came from a teenager, barely 16, who stopped while riding his bike past my driveway. "You're the guy who stopped the HOA from charging us water fees, right?" he asked. "I guess that's me." He gave a thumbs up. "Cool. My mom said you saved everyone like $800. I laughed. Glad to be of service. As he rode off, I realized something important. It hadn't just been my fight. It had been everyone's. And we'd all won. That weekend, as a light snowfall began, I carried a small plaque down to the bench I'd built. Just a simple brass plate. It read, "For those who respect the water, for those who remember the past, for those who choose stewardship over control." I screwed it into place, the metal catching glints of the winter sun. Sitting down, I wrapped my hand around a warm mug and watched the water breathe under the soft weight of snowflakes. The lake accepted the snowfall calmly, just as it had accepted every storm, every attempt to control it, every mistake humans had thrown at it. And in that moment, I understood something my grandfather must have known a century ago. Nobody really owns a lake. You're just its caretaker for the brief time you're here. The wind carried the scent of cedar and cold air, brushing against my coat collar. A quiet peace settled over the valley. The dock stood. The lake endured. And justice, real justice, had found its place on these shores. I leaned back against the bench, listening to the snow melt on the planks below. Power isn't about control. It's about knowing the land and protecting it when others forget. Here, by the water that remembers everything, the story finally came to rest. And the lake was mine to guard, not to own, but to honor. Always. If you've ever stood your ground against a pushy HOA or anyone who forgot what fairness looks like, drop a simple justice in the comments so I know I'm not alone out here on the water. And if you want more stories about folks defending what's theirs with patience, grit, and the truth on their side, go on and subscribe. I'll be here every week.